Hey guys, Pogo here, and welcome to the next episode of Bukkit Coding. In this episode, we are going to learn how to make cars using remote entities. It was requested a couple of times that I showed how to use rideable entities or, cars. So I'm going to show you how to do that. It's not just as easy as strapping a saddle to a horse. This will actually implement a couple of extra features, and it will show you how to spawn it programmatically, if that's a word, instead of just spawning a horse and then giving the player a saddle. Now, as I said, we're going to be using remote entities because rather than mess around with NMS code, it's very easy to just use remote entities to do exactly what we want, and they'll take care of all of the nitty-gritty stuff. Now, the first challenge that you'll encounter is actually finding remote entities. If you go to Bukkit and look for it, you'll see that the project is deleted. You can find it on GitHub, but if you try to download the source, then you won't be able to run it on your server unless you build it yourself. You could look for a build on their build server, but the URL does not work. I found a location that has a working copy that works on, 1.7.5 or whatever the latest version is, and it's the official one. They just had a typo in their website that it was sending it to an invalid URL. So check the description for the link. Again, if you search for it yourself, you probably won't be able to find it. So once you have it, go ahead and put it in your plugins folder, and then we can go right over here, and we want to do add external jars, and we want to get remote entities, and we want to open that up. So now we have access to remote entities in our plugin. Now what we're going to do is we are going to create a car class that represents a car. And it's easier to do this so that you can easily instantiate the car instead of having all of the code in one class, which wouldn't really make sense. Alright, so inside of the car class, we need to do actually a bunch of things. First thing that we're going to do is make a public static final Arraylist cars equals new Arraylist car. And we would probably want to capitalize that because it's a final variable. This is just going to store all of the cars, and it's very important to fix a bug that I discovered when I first made cars, which I will explain at the very end. We then want to make a constructor. We want just a plain old constructor, and now what we're going to do is we are going to say, hang on one second. Alright, so we're going to have a private entity manager. Now, the entity manager is a class of remote entities, and that's basically what's used for spawning entities. So we actually need to just quickly make a public static entity manager get entity manager, and then for this we're also going to have a private static entity manager manager, and then we're going to say, hang on, computer's running a bit slow, we need to import that, there we go. Then we're going to say if manager is equal to null, manager is equal to new entity manager. This, because it needs a plugin in order to instantiate it, I believe. Oh yeah, that's right. It is static. Hang on one second. I blanked out for a second. What we need to do is in the on enable, we just set manager equal to a new manager. We pass it this, which is a plugin, and then remote entities will create the manager and whatever. And then we have our get entity manager, which returns manager. Then we're just going to say this dot manager equal to cars dot get entity manager. Or actually, we don't need to store the manager. We just need a private remote entity ent, and we're going to say this dot ent is equal to cars dot get entity manager dot prepare entity remote entity type dot horse. We're going to do dot at location, and we're actually going to have car take a location spawn, and we're going to put it at spawn, so it will spawn. We're just going to have it be where the player is, but then we're going to say as pushable false. We don't want the car to be pushable, of course. And then we want as stationary true. We want it to remain stationary. We can say with name, and we're just going to call it car. And then with speed, we can give it speed, which you can change around. Let's just make it 10 for now, and we can take a look at that. And then you're going to call create, and this will actually create the remote entity given all of this information that we have given it. So now, after we create it, we need to assign it a feature, which is the ability for it to ride. So we're going to say remote riding feature ride is equal to new remote riding feature true and 0. So those are just some parameters that it's given. Then we're going to say ride.set rideable true, because we want it to be able to be ridden. We are then going to say ent.get features.add feature ride. So we'll now add this rideable feature, and it will be rideable. We are then finally going to do bucket.get server.get plugin manager register events, this and this, because car is going to implement listener. And it does not extend Java plugin, so actually we're going to go back over to car, and we're going to change car to actually take an instance of the plugin so that we can make this non-static. That's good. And then we also want to, when we instantiate it, we will pass in an instance of the plugin, and we're going to use that to register the events. Alright, so that is it for the car. So now we want to go ahead and say first event that we're going to do is a right click event, because what we need to do is if you're not on the car, we want to make it stay still, because by default a horse will roam around, but in this case we want it to stay still. So we're going to have a player interact entity event where when you mount the car or whatever horse, then it will unfreeze it. So at event handler public void on player interact entity, we'll call it, and this is a player interact entity event e. Alright, so now we're going to say if e.get right clicked dot equals ent dot get bucket entity, and this will return a bucket entity, so that's very important. And then we are going to we actually need to store a passenger. We're going to say if passenger is equal to null if the person on the horse or the car is equal to null. They're going to say passenger is equal to e.getPlayer. We're just storing the passenger, and then we're going to say ent.set stationary false. So we're going to enable the horse to move. And then we are going to call our onEnter method, which we don't need. Alright. Now we are going to go ahead and make another event. This is going to be onDismount. Public void on exit, we'll call it, because this is a vehicle exit event. Go ahead and import that. And we are then going to say passengers equal to null return. Not true. Because if we don't have a passenger, then it doesn't apply to us. And then we are going to say if e.getExited dot equals passenger. So if the thing that was, if the exiter was a passenger, then we are going to say passenger is equal to null, and we are going to say ent.set stationary to true, because now they are off and we want them to stop. Hang on one second. That's all that we should need for the car itself. Now we're just going to quickly, right here, we're going to say new car, this, and p.getLocation. And then that will just, when we instantiate it, it'll spawn it and do all that stuff that we need. And one more thing that we want to say is we want to say if exclamation point e.getVehicle dot if exclamation point e.getVehicle dot equals ent.getBukkitEntity return. And is that going to give us an error? No, it won't. Okay. Basically, we're just saying if the vehicle that was exited is not this, and then I guess it's not really, it's kind of redundant to have both of them, but we'll leave it in there for that. So now we have the command that does that, and the last thing that we need to do is handle for one important bug that I discovered. If a chunk is unloaded and then reloaded, the horses will lose their stationary. They will no longer remain stationary, first of all, and second of all, I believe that they become unrideable. So we're going to fix this, and that's where the car Arraylist comes into play, and I don't know why I didn't add this. Cars.add this. We need to add this to the list of cars. So now we're going, this implements listener, we're already registering the events, but we need to go ahead and add 2 events, which we'll do right here. This is going to be at event handler public void on chunk unload, and this is a chunk unload event E. It's called whenever a chunk unloads. So then we're going to say for entity ent e.getChunk.getEntity. So for every entity on the chunk that is being unloaded, then we need to say for car C or car.cars if c.isSpawn, which we'll write in 1 second, and c.getBukkitEntity.equals end. Then we need to say c.getBukkitEntity.remove. So the 2 things we just need to write is an isSpawned method and getBukkitEntity. So all we really need to do for that is a public boolean is spawned, and then we're going to return, and I believe that that should just be pretty simple. It's going to be ent.isSpawned. Then we need a public living entity get bucket entity. We're going to return ent.getBucketEntity. So now that should clear up the errors. Did I make a spelling mistake? No, I did not import living entity. Alright, so that cleared up all of that. So what we're doing is we're iterating over every entity on the unloaded chunk. Then we're checking through all of the cars, and we're saying that if the car is spawned and it's the correct, because if it's not spawned, then get bucket entity will return null because it's not spawned. So we want to avoid the null pointer exception. So if it is spawned and it is the car, then we want to remove it because we're unloading the chunk and we want to get rid of it. Now we need to reverse this process with a chunk load event. Chunk load event E for, so this is the chunk load entity ent e dot get chunk dot get entities for car C car dot cars. If exclamation point C dot is spawned, now we're going to say, so if it's not spawned, and if C dot get bucket entity is not equal to null, and C dot get bucket entity dot equals int, then C dot spawn, which we also need to write. And that reminds me, we actually want to put this in a spawn method, because we want to be able to call it first when it's constructed, and then also we want to be able to call it if we want to spawn it again, which means that we need to also save private location spawn and private cars plugin. So we're going to say this dot plugin equals plugin, this dot spawn equals spawn, and then that should be good. So now we're just going through and we are spawning all of the entities back. So that should be good. That was a lot of code there, but let's go ahead and export it and see how it is. I'm going to call this cars. And I already have a server running, so let's reload it. And RemoteEntities needs to be enabled in order to use this. And why is RemoteEntities not enabled? Does say it loaded. Ah, yes. I believe that we need to say, I believe that there's a line that we need to add right here. Let me check on that. The line is depend remote entities, so we know that this plugin is dependent upon remote entities, and now it will know that it needs to load remote entities before it loads cars, and then we're not going to get that error. So now let's go ahead and join the server and see if there are any more bugs that we're going to encounter. So we are on the server. Let's get to a nice open place. Alright. That's strange, my keys. Alright, there we go. Now let's go ahead and do /car. Now as you can see, a car has been spawned, and now we can go ahead and get on it, but it does not appear to actually drive. So let's go ahead and take a look back in the code. Give me 1 second. Do is something that I completely forgot to do. We need to actually give the horse a saddle so that we can ride it. So we're going to go ahead and say craft horse ent.get bucket entity, and this will come after spawn, so that will work. And then we are going to say .get inventory. Sorry, craft horse inventory, I believe. Is that right? Hang on one more second. Alright, so it was craft horse. We are doing, so we're getting this horse inventory to, we're casting the bucket entity to craft horse, which is a an entity that Bukkit NMS entity, rather, that represents a horse. We're getting the inventory, and then we're calling set saddle, and we're setting it to a new saddle. Just go ahead and reload. And now, if we spawn a car, you'll see that it does, in fact, have a saddle on it, and we can ride it. Now, we are going incredibly fast, so you would probably want to turn the speed down, but as you can see, it is certainly faster than a regular horse. Now, let's find a nice place to dismount. So I've gotten off the horse, and as you can see, any attempt to bump into it or whatever is not doing anything, but as soon as I get on it, I can ride it around. And right now I'm having some trouble piloting it because of how fast it is, and I will turn down the speed in just a second. But let me just quickly show you that an error does not occur if I go away. Let's get this fly speed up. So let's just fly away for a while, and I think it's safe to assume that chunk is probably unloaded by now. Just give it a second. Yeah. So now it's going to load all of the chunks, and now we gotta remember exactly where it was. There's our horse that came back, and it did in fact not work. One second. So I've looked over the code for a few minutes, and I've compared it to another version of the code that I happen to know works, and I cannot figure out what the issue is. I moved away, and it said it was removed, and I moved back, and it lost its saddle. And it does still stay still, but I've noticed that sometimes it'll, rear up and do a horse cry move. So I am not completely sure what to do there. It could be a bug in RemoteEntities. I don't know how new this build is. It could just be an issue with my code, and if I happen to find the issue, or if one of you finds the issue, please let me know the fix, and I will of course update it so that you guys can have a better working version. So that is all for this video. It was another look at RemoteEntities. We used it a while ago to make NPCs, but now we are actually using it to make special rideable horses. The last thing I'm going to do before we go is turn the speed way down. Let's just make it like a 2, because that 10 was a bit ridiculous. So, as always, subscribe if you want to see more, comment with what you want to learn. If you like this video, click the like button, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.